Baldur's Gate 3 is better than Dungeons & Dragons. That's just not possible, I hear you yelling. Considering Baldur's Gate 3 just adopted D&D system and modified it into a video game mechanic. But what if that's just being reductive? Baldur's Gate 3 has made the D&D system much more interesting and accessible. With its compelling gameplay and densely packed content, it's been much more fun to play with this system in a video game format than playing it in a tabletop setting. We mentioned in our review, check it out by the way, that Baldur's Gate 3 is a gateway for players who haven't tried Dungeons & Dragons. It's great for the millions of people who've been fans of things like Critical Role or Dimension 20, but haven't been able to actually do their own campaign. But that begs the question, if so many are interested in D&D, why haven't they actually just tried playing D&D?
Hard to say, but there's a lot we don't know.
Is it the dense lore, the almost infinite number of rules to go by, or that no one wants to be a dungeon master? Thankfully, we have Baldur's Gate 3 to hook players who want to enjoy a deep RPG with some classic D&D gameplay. In just a short amount of time, Baldur's Gate 3 has become one of the highest rated games of all time, with critics and gamers giving it universal acclaim. It's a landmark in the gaming community, with how quickly the game ascended to the mountaintop. Some players say they've taken an interest in trying out D&D after playing Baldur's Gate 3, while some fans say that it reignited their love for the tabletop RPG. And while there have been a lot of video games that try to emulate the authentic experience of D&D, none have been able to capture its spirit. Part of the problem might just have been a generational issue. The first Baldur's Gate titles had the daunting task of working around the advanced D&D system, while Neverwinter Nights refined the experience when it used the 3rd edition version. Regardless of what the problem was, nothing comes close to how Baldur's Gate 3 utilized D&D's 5th edition mechanics and exceeded expectations.
The console hums to life, but what is its purpose?
Is Baldur's Gate 3 better than Dungeons & Dragons? Tune in to find out. So, how do they do it? First off, it's been decades since the release of Baldur's Gate 2 Shadows of Am. Graphics and gameplay standards have drastically changed since then. Aside from the obvious generational gap in visual and usability fidelity, the D&D rules themselves underwent massive changes as well. As we mentioned, Baldur's Gate 3 uses the current D&D 5th edition rule set as a base, but with some striking differences. For one, Baldur's Gate 3's system has fewer restrictions and is modified to accommodate the shift to a video game format, making it a lot more convenient for beginners as well as for gamers who have never tried a tabletop version. From classes, spells, monsters, and ideologies, Baldur's Gate 3 presented a D&D system faithful to the classic tabletop experience. While Baldur's Gate 3 has a plot that's already set in stone, with the devs placing players in a contained narrative, the creative freedom classic D&D provides comes at a heavy cost. Time. Time for planning the campaign, time for fleshing out characters, and time for scheduling. The greatest D&D foe of all time. So for those who want to solely enjoy the experience without the fuss, Baldur's Gate 3 offers a fixed plot and character presets that lessens the chances of getting overwhelmed, while still allowing creative freedom with some limitations. Another area we see a reduction in freedom is in character creation. Character creation in Baldur's Gate 3 has tons of stuff missing that tabletop D&D can easily remedy, like the Artificer class and some lineages in the updated D&D books. But while it isn't as extensive as D&D, Baldur's Gate 3 still has a bold selection of characters and origin stories.
It might be wiser to keep an open mind on the matter. Our visitors' promises of aid might yet bear valuable fruit.
12 classes, 46 subclasses, and 11 races are still plenty for players to craft their unique storyline and avatars. Having their characteristics, strengths, and weaknesses be visually displayed helps immensely as well. In combat, Baldur's Gate 3 allows players to see the stats and abilities of enemies, as opposed to D&D, which relies on the guidance of the DM and the theater of the mind. We're also given clear visual representation of the consequences of our actions, eliminating the need for long winding explanations.
If there's anything you can do,
I'm watching you.
One might argue that imagination looks better than the game's graphics, but there are plenty who just prefer to actually see what's happening. Movement has also been adapted to fit a more realistic 3D representation of the world. Characters are free to move around the battlefield by using line measurements created by the player, with options to jump and fly. Players are also given bonus actions that aren't typically allowed in standard D&D settings, such as drinking potions and shoving enemies. These movement options and extra bonus actions allow players a lot more freedom to tackle a battle in ways that don't need to contest with the DM. RPGs in general have streamlined a lot of the more popular mechanics taken from D&D, but the chances and certain numbers are typically hidden in these types of games. As mentioned above, Baldur's Gate 3 adapts the mechanics of the D&D 5th edition, but it does it in a way that players can see how each action happens by visually showing a dice roll. The dice rolling interface almost truly captures the feeling of playing D&D. The biggest change from D&D here though is that it shows exactly what number you would need to succeed. This number is called the difficulty class, or the DC, and in a real D&D session, that's usually hidden. The DM usually decides on what the DC is and just compares the player's rolls to what they decided. But in Baldur's Gate 3, it shows exactly how high the hurdle is ahead of you. This benefits players, as the dice rolls clearly show the players whether or not their actions are successful, and removes the uncertainty of, did the DM just not want this to happen? It puts the fact that all these outcomes are based on your rolls, and is an integral part of your decision making in Baldur's Gate 3. Do you take the chances to try something where the chances are weighed heavily against you? Or do you take the easier route? Skill checks especially make every interaction feel unpredictable. Even when you decide to take the easier route, sometimes you'll fail even when you select an option with a skill that you're adept in. But in Baldur's Gate 3, even a failure isn't the end, because you might gain another roll or use inspirations to roll again and increase your chances of success. The unpredictability in every conversation and battle makes things interesting every time it happens. Even skill checks just feel satisfying, especially when knowing that the success of every action is visible and in the palm of your hand. The high ground strategy is used in combat to gain an advantage over your opponent. Positioning yourself on top of different kinds of terrain and other obstacles allow you to see the surrounding area, as well as great opportunities to easily defeat your opponents. But getting to the high ground isn't limited to combat. Alignment is a notable mechanic in D&D where players follow a loose set of ethics and morals that they determine during character creation. In the current rule set, alignment is rarely used and mostly ignored by some DMs. Baldur's Gate 3 modifies this by allowing players to decide who they are in the moment. They have the freedom to shape their path through multiple dialogue options, some informed by the kind of character they're playing as, such as a drow using the knowledge of their goddess Lolth, or a barbarian using intimidation to resolve issues. You can also use multiple saves to explore what certain outcomes each dialogue options would lead to. This also means players may have to engage in battles if they trip on their words.
What is the worth of a single mortal's life?
Permanent death is something that any player in D&D wouldn't want to wish upon themselves ever happening. There is nothing worse than spending tons of hours in quests, missions, and even developing relationships, only to lose your character by unluckily rolling low or meeting an overpowered enemy. In Baldur's Gate 3, however, revivifying spell scrolls are accessible enough. Save scumming is also a thing. Creating multiple saves before engaging in battles or situations that are sometimes impossible to leave allows players to reload their saves to choose a different option or when one of their party members dies in battle. While some may argue that having realistic consequences is a big part of the appeal of D&D, many might not be able to handle the fact that their character just died and will have to start over. Having the option to create different outcomes through multiple save files is a big reason why Baldur's Gate 3 is easier and more interesting to manage in gameplay.
That is a great relief. Oh, a great relief indeed.
Playing with friends is one of the reasons why Baldur's Gate 3 is fun to dive into. Of course, Dungeons & Dragons is built on the foundation of creating campaigns and role-playing multiple characters amongst friends. However, Baldur's Gate 3 is much more accessible to gathering parties, since campaigns are already set up for anyone to pick up. As we mentioned earlier, it takes a lot of time to gather players and set up sessions in D&D. In Baldur's Gate 3, multiplayer can be done through local co-op or by creating a server online. Currently, there is no support for an in-game chat to communicate with your friends. However, you can easily interact with them via Steam or Discord. One of the most exciting things about Dungeons & Dragons is the power of choice. In D&D, you have the option to do, well, anything, which includes players speaking freely and taking actions with the guidance of the Dungeon Master and some creative thinking. Baldur's Gate 3 harnessed these powers by offering engaging conversations, where other players can join the chatter to vote on predetermined dialogue options. This takes off a little bit of the pressure of making choices when you're not sure what's the best thing to do. And it's not like your freedom is taken away either. You can follow your intuition or select the majority vote. The more characters your party has, the more varied and exciting decision making can be. Role-playing has never been more interesting than when you and your buddies create your own characters and brand your own backstories. Following different storylines in Faerun will take your adventures to unpredictable situations you'd never even thought possible.
Hold on to your knickers. This might sting a bit.
Moving past beaches, fighting through ambushes, and discovering dark catacombs, it'll take just one of you to accidentally set off traps that'll burn one of your companions. And that's the fun part, since the game rewards players for their curiosity, even if it costs them a limb or two. Sharing these experiences with party members creates memorable moments, even if players are physically away from each other. The multiplayer mode can still provide a single-player experience while still being an active member of the host server. This means that everything still happens in real time. This is something that isn't possible in D&D, since the tabletop version only has one DM to pay attention to each player. In Baldur's Gate 3, they can move around freely and have interactions in different areas all at the same time. So if one player is taking their sweet time at camp, the other members can engage in different activities, such as actively doing quests or meeting up with other points of interest in the land of Faerun. Even after a party member leaves the game, the host can control the characters and continue the campaign. Other players can jump in and out of the server and control the companions if they ever join again. Contrast this with D&D, where campaigns take a lot more time and commitment to revisit, since players from the previous session would have to physically gather again. Baldur's Gate 3 is enjoyable in every way we could have ever imagined. Whether taking on dungeons by yourself or taking up arms alongside your friends, you're in for a ride from the ground up. We think that Baldur's Gate 3 makes D&D incredibly accessible. Of course, admittedly, there's still an unmatchable satisfaction in gathering your friends to play a traditional session of D&D. The ability to tell original stories, solve problems with no limitations, and build characters exactly how you want using your creativity and imagination is one of the reasons why it's still so beloved by millions worldwide. But if you're just wanting a casual session where you can mess around with your friends without having to think too hard about the logistics, Baldur's Gate 3 delivers that in spades. You'll have the most wonderful time diving into the magical world of Faerun. So, what about you guys? Do you think Baldur's Gate 3 is better than Dungeons & Dragons? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Oh, and be sure to check out our full review for Baldur's Gate 3, linked in the description below. This is GameMate, and we'll see you in the next one.